perhaps a designated French repetiteur who will make it more understandable.
We'll try.
And, so let me tell you a little bit about Poulenc and how he got to be Poulenc, and maybe a little bit less about the four pieces, because I mean, it's so much fun to discover these on your own. I'll give like a few little things that I think are particularly wonderful about this music that we're doing. So Poulenc was born in 1899, a child of the last millennium, the century, and his father owned a pharmaceutical company, the Poulenc Frères, which still exists today in the form of Sanofi. His mother played the piano. She was very artistic. She introduced him to Mozart and Beethoven, but also to what he called the adorable bad music, the show tunes and things like that. Her brother, his uncle, liked to go to the Opera Comique and places like that, and so he introduced him to Stravinsky at a relatively young age, which probably explains some of his, Anyway, he studied piano from the age of 5. He was quite a good pianist. His father expected he'd take over the family business, and he didn't seem to make too much problem about that, although he was never interested in that. And so he went to regular school rather than to the conservatoire. And you may know that in the conservatoire, kids started at like age 10 or 12, and they just continued until they had completed the curriculum and were able to graduate. So it wasn't unusual for someone of his young age to start the conservatoire, but he didn't. He went to regular school, and he was one of the few composers in his group of people that was not conservatoire educated. That was always kind of a sore spot with him. At 15, he began studying with a guy named Ricardo Viñas. Viñas was one of the great pianists of the day. He was a Spanish pianist. He was a very colorful character, one of the colorful characters that Poulenc got involved with. He looked like he just stepped off his estancia. He had like a flat-brimmed cowboy hat and these enormous mustaches, and wore lace-up boots like he was channeling Pancho Villa. And Poulenc said he used to kick him when he didn't pedal often enough. But he was one of the great pianists of his day, and was the only ones who did contemporary French composers. So he did Ravel, he did Debussy, he did Satie in his instant concert programs, and he actually introduced Poulenc to Georges Auric and to Satie, and they were both very influential on his career later on. So his parents both died before he was 18.
Wow.
And so he lived with his older sister, but he immediately wanted to get into the cabaret culture of Paris, and there was no one to stop him. So he did, and he had introductions to a lot of the people, and he just hung out at where they hung out, and he was very outgoing, and he was a fabulous pianist by this time. So he quickly became a part of that scene. Satie thought he was kind of a musical dilettante because he didn't seem to have much background, but eventually warmed to him. Might have been in 1917, he wrote his first piece that was performed, which was called the Rhapsody Nègre, the Negro Rhapsody, based on a book that presented itself as poetry by a librarian person. It was totally fictitious. The African words were total, just made up sounds and things, and it was filled with French slang and things like that. But he wrote this piece. It's a 5-movement piece for clarinet, flute, strings, piano, and baritone soloist. And it's actually a wonderful piece. It's on YouTube if you ever want to hear it. It's really quite well written. piece, and it shows some of Satie's influence on him already. Satie was unusual person, to say the least. He was very eccentric, but you know what his serious contribution to music was that he rejected romanticism and all the thick, richly textured kind of music, chansons, I'm pointing right at you, kind of stuff, and tried to pare music down to its bare minimum of melody and accompaniment. And so he was really the first minimalist, and he also did a lot of repetition. So 50 years before, you know, John Cage and Steve Reich, he was, you know, the first minimalist. And so a lot of the music in the Rhapsody Negre is like that. It's very repetitive. It's got a lot of parallel chords, especially in the first movement. It makes it sound a little bit like Debussy. And then it has the nonsense stuff that gets sung by the baritone, which I wrote some of this down. The guy who wrote it was somebody who was supposedly named Makulu Kangaroo. And so the baritone gets to sing Honolulu, Potolama, Katimoko, Mosibolu, and the baritone decided that this would just leave him open to ridicule, and so he bailed at the last moment. So Poulenc jumped up and sang the part himself, even though he's not a singer, and he was already in uniform because he was in 1917. He'd been finally called up to the army. It turned out to be a very popular piece for, don't know what reason. Stravinsky saw it, he liked it. He made arrangements for Poulenc to get in touch with his publisher so that he can have his music published, which was pretty cool. During the war, he was actually ended up as a clerk typist in the Ministry of Aviation in Paris, so he didn't have to go too far, and so he could continue to compose. And he wrote a setting of some poetry by Guillaume Apollinaire called Le Bestiaire, and it was really made Apollinaire's poetry suddenly popular in Paris when it was released. And he also wrote the Trois Mouvements Perpétuels, which also became a very popular piece, and a very difficult, piano piece. He was a fabulous pianist. So this got him into. Satie had been part of a group that was organizing concerts in a salon where they would he would handpick some musicians, but they would also have paintings by contemporary artists hung. And he decided it would be kind of cool if he were a mentor to a young group of people. He was by now 50. He had only recently achieved some fame with a work he wrote in collaboration with Cocteau for Diaghilew's Ballet Russe, with costumes by Picasso, called Parade, which you can also see some clips on YouTube. It's a fascinating thing to watch. It's just a series of characters one by one coming out and dancing in these elaborate and really bizarre costumes. And that made him pretty well known, finally, after all these years of languishing, writing music, like, three pieces in the shape of a pear, and something called Vexations, which the instruction is to play this theme 840 times. And you can prepare for it by sitting absolutely immobile for a while. It never got performed until John Cage did it with a tag team of pianists. It took them 18 hours to do this, and I'm not sure if they actually counted to make sure it was 840 times or not. But that was he was an unusual composer. Anyway, he decided that he would gather together a bunch of musicians, and Poulenc was one. And actually, all the ones who were in Decease were in this group that he called Les Nouveaux Jeunes, the new youth, the new young people. And then he got bored with the group and kind of gave them up, which left an opportunity for Cocteau to step in. He desperately wanted to be the mentor of a group of musicians and be their spokesman. And so he buttonholed this reporter, or this critic, music critic, composer who couldn't get his work published, and so became a music critic, Henri Poulenc. And so he came up with a catchy title for an article about them: the Russian Five, the French Six, and Monsieur Satie. And the name, the French Six, or Les Six, stuck even though the composers had nothing to do with each other. It's a pub quiz question. You know who's in Les Six?
Mio.
Oui. Anybody else?
Duruflé? No.
No. Mendel.
Shoot. No, of course not.
Close to that. There was a Louis Duret
That
was
was
in there.
Auric, wasn't he one?
Yes, Georges Auric, Germaine Taillefer, and Arthur Honegger, who actually was born in the German-speaking portion of Switzerland, so it was Herr Honegger when he was back home in Zurich. But, he spent a lot of time in France, so I guess he could go either way. And so, and even though, and Darius Milhaud, right? And even though they had nothing in common with each other other than they had to be on the same program, they recognized, a branding opportunity when they saw it. And so they did collaborate a little bit with each other. They produced an album of 6 piano pieces that had nothing to do with each other, and they collaborated on a ballet. But they mostly went their separate ways. But he was, Poulenc was one of those Decease, the only one who didn't have a musical background, a conservatory background. He was self-taught as a composer. But he was incredibly lucky or incredibly talented. I mean, the music, if you look at his early music, it's really well written. Almost everything he touched turned out wonderful. People loved everything. He had very few failures. He did study for a while with a guy named Charles Kirchlin, who was as bizarre as Satie was. He had the enthusiasms for Renaissance music and movie stars and photography. He was an amateur astronomer. He loved mountain climbing, and he also loved counterpoint. He drilled him in counterpoint. And Auric would pull him back when he thought his Poulenc style was getting too much abused by his studies with Kirkland. In 1936, Poulenc was shocked by the death of one of his friends, a composer named Pierre Octave Ferrou, who was killed in a particularly gruesome car accident. And he had already been planning a visit to the Shrine of Roch Amador in France, which has this famous Black Virgin icon. And so the two things kind of came together, and he always considered himself a devout Catholic, but he kind of reawakened his interest in the church. He was a person who could hold contradictory elements and not see there's any problem with it. So he thought he was a devout Catholic. He was also openly gay at a time when the church said to that sort of thing. And so he wrote the Litany à la Vierge Noire in one night when he first got there, and started writing a lot more sacred choral music. And some of the sacred choral music were these four motets for the time of Christmas. They wrote in 1951 to 52. And they're set to the antiphons for the Christmas and Epiphany readings. And they are relatively short readings. So one of the things that Poulenc does is set them in with completely different character and flavor, so that each one is totally unique. He spent a lot of time doing theatrical music. This was like second nature to him. But each one has its own particular feeling, and which is one of the things I think is really pretty interesting about them. O Magnum Mysterium is I think the best text what a great mystery and wonderful sacrament that animals should see the birth of the Lord lying in a manger. A very, very humbling text, which church could probably use some more humbling, but these days. And he sets these things out of whole cloth, so he doesn't set things to where he's setting individual words to their meanings usually, but the entire piece when it comes out gets the character, and so this has this very mysterious character to it. And there are a couple of things you probably will notice about this piece, so I'll tell them to you anyway, so I can say I said it first. So the piece is written, if you look at your score, it's written without a key signature, right? It's not in the key of C. And he's very flexible, and he's a fundamentally tonal composer. When he wrote the dialogues of the Carmelites, he issued an apology that his nuns could only sing tonal music. He was not a fan of the atonal music or 12-tone music that was becoming in vogue when he wrote the dialogues of the Carmelites. So he has a very flexible idea of tonality, and you can see that in Omanium especially. That long vocal line that the upper voices have kind of skirts, multiple keys. You kind of don't quite know where it's going, and it even starts the lower voice. There's this thing that's very mysterious, kind of chanting music, and it goes from B flat minor to G. What? It's just unexpected. And you can tell that he's not really setting text because of what he does with that yacentem, which means lying. Yacentem means praesepia, lying in the manger. Not important part of that phrase, but that's the part that really gets a lot of emphasis. That's the part that gets forte. What's he doing with that? I don't know. He did say a lot of things because he liked the sound of the word, and yacentem is the only word in this entire text that has that sound to it, beginning with the ya sound. But it reminds me, it's a very painterly quality to me. If you remember the movie Mr. Turner, remember that movie about J.M. Turner, the English painter? All right. Well, he's at an exhibition of paintings. He's famous for seascape. He sees a painting that's a seascape by one of his colleagues, and blue water, blue sky, little blue land in the background, all blue. And he looks at it, takes out a tube of vermilion paint, squirts a big dot in this painting, and then shapes it with his thumbnail, and it turns into a buoy. And then you look at the painting, and it's completely transformed. That one little bit of color in all this sameness is transformed, and the same thing I think happens here. Is all this mysterioso stuff, and you have that one little bit of brightness, and it completely transforms this music. That's so the next one in the set is Quem vidistis. Quem vidistis. So you start to pronounce things like Poulenc set them, and this is one of the other things I think is very interesting, because he does this with a lot of his music, where he sets weak syllables on strong beats, and so you get this contrast then between the way you should pronounce the words and the way the music is set, and there's this pull to it that it makes it a lot more interesting. It sounds when you sing it, quem vidistis pastores dicite. Well, those are all the weak syllables. It's quem vidistis pastores dicite. It's just a very cool thing, and he almost gives no direction at all about this. Dicite puts an accent on, because it's the word that he actually wants to. He's going to use this word again in the piece, and he wants to set that up. But this kind of push-pull between that, and how much you, as a chorus, you try to maintain the word accents and contrast them with the musical accents is kind of up to the conductor. But just hearing it, you know what it's going to sound like, right? You know how the words are pronounced, so you get this subliminal feeling of this push-pull, like trains. When they start, they pull at the couplers. And anyway, I think that's another very cool effect of this. Vidente Stellam, this is my personal favorite in this set. It's absolutely marvelous piece. This is for the Epiphany, the reading for Epiphany. And it's a story of the wise men, right? They've seen his star, they rejoice because they've seen his star, and they finally get to the dwelling where the Christ child is, and they give their gifts. And so it starts out with just three-part harmony. Three wise men, three-part harmony. Pretty, yeah. But then after that's repeated, suddenly he adds the bass voices. So it's the top three, and then he adds the bass voices in there in division. This is wonderful, wonderful second bass line. I won't say second basses, but second basses, yeah. And suddenly the sonority of this just becomes so much more. It's just, to me, it's a very magical moment when I hear that increase in the sonority of this piece. I've got a recording in French and by a French choir, and it drives me nuts because they pronounce the magie as magie. And every time I hear it, the first three times I heard it, I was wondering, what am I hearing? I thought I knew this piece, and it's just the French pronunciation. So, and again, so this is very calm when they're following the star out there in the desert alone, and then it gets progressively a little bit more excited as they finally reach the dwelling where the Christ child is and can give them their gifts, and then it gets calm again at the end. It's a wonderful way of setting this. And the last one is for the ODA is for the Mass during the day on Christmas, or actually the Vespers Mass during Christmas time, the Mass of the evening. Oh, I want to say something about, I want to say something about the Quem Vidistis. So of the things, I forgot, of the things that he can do, he can hold two contrary ideas at the same time, and so he can hold reverence and humor at the same time. And if you look at this text, it's actually pretty funny. So people are saying, tell us, shepherds, what you saw, and you can see the shepherds getting ready to take a voice, and they come out with digite, and tell us, announce the birth of the Christ child. The poor shepherds never get a chance to say anything, right? In this whole thing. And I can just see this really appealing to him and his sense of humor. He plays it straight, but I can just hear him laughing in the background. You remember Paul was talking about the Gloria, that La Dame de Stay part, very bouncy and things, and he said he got inspired for that by watching the monks playing soccer. Each of the rooms so they could play soccer, and the paintings of Giotto that had the devil sticking out their tongues at the people who were looking at the painting. So he had a lot of he had a interesting sense of humor, but comes out in a lot of these things. And I think behind this, that's why this is kind of a good humored piece. I think it's just is one of the things. So the ODA is really just pretty much a vocal fanfare from start to finish. But you'll hear some things that he does, like a bunch of parallel chords, all the voices together. Again, this is this kind of Debussy, parallel chord that he did in the Rhapsody Negre back in 1917. So this is 1952. It's still pretty good stuff. And the fast runs and things in this, you can imagine a brass choir doing this piece rather than a chorus. So, but these are just absolutely wonderful pieces. They're simply jewels, and it takes, I think, more skill to do a short piece like this and make everything sound different, everything sound interesting. And you can see how each piece he does just different stuff to it. The way he does the voicing. Sometimes he has parallel voicing where he does, like the tenors and sopranos are singing in the Quem Vidistis, while the other groups are making this kind of fill in the middle. You get these different sounds. This is a particularly French thing, I think, that that no matter how big the forces are, they combine them and recombine them in different ways all the time, and so you get this absolute clarity of sound, even in big orchestral movement music. Not Saint-Saëns, not Berlioz, but everybody else. And so I think he's an exemplar of that. And by the way, when after 1936, it wasn't like he suddenly became serious. He still wrote a lot of stuff. He finished Les Mamelles de Tiresias, his first opera about, which was a text by Poulenc about the woman whose breasts turn into balloons and floats away, and she becomes a man. She becomes a general, and she's very warlike, and her husband is left there, and he suddenly becomes very nurturing and tries to figure out how men can bear children, and he figures out to have 1,600,000 children in a single day. And it's also kind of the epitome of the absurdist style. But so he wrote things like that. After this 1936, he suddenly didn't become pious. But he did write a lot of sacred music, and it really did mean something to him. So that's what I got.
Comment that for the Vedente Stella in the beginning, I can see these three wise men under the stars in the desert so perfectly. Not that every word is painted, but as you said, the entire mood is set by that. And I also would like, one time in my life, to sing bass the last three notes of the Hodiad, where they go up a tritone, bum, 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 because I think that's a great way to end the piece.
Yes.
But I love the pieces. Of course, they're meant for a chamber choir, which we are not, but we can do a pretty good approximation of it, I think.
So,
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you.